G'day guys, today what we're going to do is we're going to update this quad to the latest Betaflight 4.4.1 release, and the reason for that is when going into GPS rescue and landing, we've had a problem with this one where it just chops the power, disarms the quad when it's probably 10 meters above the ground, causing it to land pretty heavily. This has apparently been fixed, and we want to now add this to this particular quad. So before we start, most important thing, as you get told everywhere, make sure you remove the propellers from the aircraft, because you are going to be testing the motors and it is going to be a problem, and it could create a issue for you by chopping you up. I've been cut by propellers previously and it's not a comfortable situation. So here we go. I'm now going to move over to screen recording and let's watch the screen record. Update firmware is where we want to click. So we want to click on the update firmware to start off with. We then go over to this section over here and we have auto detect. Click the auto detect, and what it's going to do is have a look and see exactly which controller you have. And the flight controller on this one is an F405 US, and we're going to make sure we have full chip arrays. We definitely want expert mode enabled. Going further down, what does all these other things mean? No boot sequence, don't worry about that. Manual baud rate, leave it alone. Classic mode means it takes you back to the old screens that we used to have. Now the other options, definitely got GPS on this quad. I don't use LED strips, so I'm going to click that off. SD stands for on-screen display, standard definition. We're using high definition, so we're going to click that off. There's the high definition. Pin IO. IO stands for input-output. We're not doing any input-outputs with switches, doing anything special. That's probably for other types of aircraft, generally not used with quads. Clicking that off. VTX, yes, we'll leave that on because it's not causing us any grief. So under that column, all I've got is GPS, OSD, and VTX. Moving over to telemetry protocols. If we have a look at telemetry protocols, there's a few protocols at here. None of them are applicable to what I'm doing, so we're not going to bother. Motor protocol, very important that it is, in this case, D-shot. Make sure that you have the correct protocol for your flight controller. Read it up if you need to. Custom defines means you can go into GitHub and have a look at what someone's developing or has developed and actually put it in. And it's always in the form of a hash plus a few numbers like hash 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You click it in there and it will automatically add that customization to your build. Here we go down here, which is what we're going to commit to, is 4.4.1. Going down to the load firmware online, click the load firmware on online. What you'll notice is the cloud builder will start building at this point in time. And there it is building over there at the minute. We'll just wait for that to finish. Okay, we now have success. We've got a build, it's done. At this point, we go down and we flash the firmware. That is down here on the bottom. Press the flash the firmware, and you'll see it's erasing the flight controller at the moment, which is getting rid of the current 4.4.0 off of the flight controller. And as soon as that's completed, it will then start to load the new file, flashing as it says. It's now putting the build that we have told it to put on here using the cloud builder. That gives us a custom fit for our flight controller as opposed to loading a whole heap of stuff that you don't need. And that's why I removed some of those things. Not for any reason other than there's no point having stuff on there that I'm never going to use. Will it take up a lot of space? Not really. Does it matter? Not really. But like I said, I prefer not to do it. As you can see, programming has been successful, and currently you can hear the quad beeping in the background here. We're now going to connect the quad, and the first screen that comes up, it asks you to apply custom defaults. This is not negotiable. This is something that you just click yes. Now, what it's going to also tell us once it reconnects is that the following warnings: accelerator is not enabled, but is not calibrated. Is enabled, but not calibrated. We're going to do that now. So we close that screen. What they're talking about is calibrating the gyros to make sure that the drone sits flat on the desk. So what you do is you have the drone sitting here next to you on the desk, and as you can see, currently it's saying 353 degrees, 09, 06 degrees pitch roll. Press that button. It will then calibrate it. Over here, we then have the next important item, which is reset the Z-axis offset. Click on that, and what it will do is it will reset the Z-axis offset. Now, when you then pick up the quad and you lift it, you want the quad to lift and rotate and do everything that it's supposed to do on the screen. If it's doing all of that, you know that the calibration has been successful. We then move to the second part of this, which is the ports tab. Now, under the ports tab, I always make a point of writing these things down. And in fact, I have a book next to me which has all of the data that I need, because for sure, otherwise you're going to be fiddling around trying to work out what was on the screen. So before you even start doing these sort of things, always back up your quad in case you need to know. Now, I know that in this particular one, I need the RX on UART 1. I've got the MSP, which is this tag here on UART 2. I'm going to switch that one off. I have got GPS on UART 5, so we just go across to here, save and reboot. Once it's rebooted, we can go back and just check the ports tab to make sure they're correct. Yes, we've got RX on UART 1. I've got MSP on 2. You can go across to the peripheral over here and put GTX, MSP, DisplayPort, and all that over there. I haven't found it necessary, so I'm not doing it. It is necessary on the O3 units. This is not an O3, this is an original A unit, so I'm not going to do that. Next tab we go under is configuration, and once we're under configuration, we'll start with the left-hand side. I'm going to click barometer if supported, only because it helps GPS rescue if you've actually got a barometer on your flight controller or on your particular GPS chip. Craft name, in this particular one, we're just going to give it as the Roma HD. And the pilot name, of course, is me. And the camera angle, some people say it's not important. I always put it down roughly 25 degrees. This is the most important, arming. Maximum arm angle in degrees. Always make sure you put down 180 degrees. The reason being is if the quad's laying on its back somewhere in the grass, the last thing you want to do is have to try and find it when you possibly can just flick a switch and flip after crash. We'll see that in the modes later. And turn the quad over and fly it home so you didn't have to go and try and search for the darn thing. Now on this particular one, it is coming up with soft serial. It's just an additional UART port if you need it. I'm not going to worry about it. Air mode on in my case, which is permanent. I like flying with it on. OSD, of course, we want on-screen display. Now here's an important one. Depending on which GPS you're using, you get a choice between U-blocks and Numier. Always use U-blocks. Numier is one-way traffic. U-blocks means that the GPS can talk to the flight controller and the flight controller can talk to the GPS. I also click on Galileo because it gives you a whole heap of extra settings that you can use and more satellites. The next one down is set home point once. What that means is if you click it on, which I will do for this particular quad, it means that if you land the quad away from you and you disarm it and then you take it off again and you tell it to go home, it'll go home to where it was sitting on the ground, unless you've got the set home point once, which is that you've set it once you rearm it, it'll come back to where you are. Probably a safety thing. Over on this side, roll in degrees and all that, that's only used if you've mounted your flight controller where the arrow is pointing to the right or to the left or backwards, or you've got your flight controller upside down. That is where you need to make these changes. They do nothing else. Mag alignment, forget that. Accelerometer, roll, trim, not going to change anything. D-shot beacons. This is if the quad is laying in the grass and you want to find it, you want to have a beep go off when you switch a switch. So you click that one on and on. So RX lost or RX seed, it'll beep on both. The one I always turn off when we get down here, here's a whole bunch of beeper configurations. And in fact, you turn pretty much all of them off. The one that is generally the most irritating is that one, which means that if you connect your quad to the USB and power it up, it's going to go beeping crazy around you. And I don't like that one. Once we've got to that stage, down here on the right-hand side, save and reboot. Right, we've rebooted in that. What we're going to do now is we're going to do power and battery. Power and battery is a good idea to have yourself a multimeter. Take a battery that you've got hanging about. Check to see what the voltage on the battery actually is in the multimeter. Okay, we're going to put a battery onto the quad, and we know that the voltage is 16.67. Go to the calibrate tab on the bottom over here. Press calibrate, measured voltage, 16.67, and press calibrate. Apply the calibration, and we now have hopefully a calibration on our flight that will tell us what the voltage actually is. Once we've done that, we go to the Failsafe tab. I'm going to disconnect the battery while we're doing this. Don't need a battery. Under the Failsafe tab, we have choices. And the choices are that you have stage 1 and stage 2 and kill. We're not going to use stage 2. We're definitely not going to use kill. Kill means exactly what it says, which is stop flying. Under stage 2, it tells you that the guard time, which is the time that the drone actually will use before it switches into whatever you set in stage 2. So stage 1 is whatever it's doing, and stage 2 is what you want it to do. 1.5 seconds is too long. So in my case, I'm going to zero that out and put a nothing in there. Half a second is enough. I don't want the quad hanging about in the air, because 1.5 seconds, if you are 5 or 10 feet off the ground, it will just land on the ground. So we're not going to do that. But underneath that, we see drop. I don't want drop. Drop is only good if you're inside a bando in a building or something and you want it to land on a floor. And if you're going to fly those type of areas, you need to use drop, not anything else. Land is one I've never used. The one I always use is GPS rescue. Now, this one has come up with a whole lot of new changes in 4.4.1. And the changes are that it's given us an angle of 70 degrees. It used to be 40 odd degrees. And it's also increased the ground speed and a few other things. Minimum satellites, that's really important. They're telling you 8. You could use 6. My advice is rather use 8 or as many as you can get. Now, the difference between 6 and 8 or 6 and 32 is if you've got a really good GPS like I have now, which is the BZGNSS units, they are the Series 10 GPS chips, and they get 32 satellites. So you're never worrying about how many you need. The more satellites, the more accurate it is. Once we're over here, we've then got throttle, which is currently set to auto. I'm putting it on to hold. In other words, if I'm flying the thing along and I lose power as far as video is concerned, and I want to get it home, the last thing I want is it to go into some sort of auto function that I don't understand. So I put it on hold and then save and reboot. Okay, we've saved and we've rebooted. The next thing that we want to go into is the receiver. Now, to get the receiver working, we need to have the receiver switched on. So we are going to power up the goggles. We're also going to power up the quad. And we're also going to switch on the receiver. So we've got everything functioning on here. Now, as soon as we get the signal back and everybody's green and happy with each other, because they should all be bound, right? We've got green on the receiver. Now, looking at the throttle on the receiver, if you push it, you want to get as close to 2000 as you can. 1996 for me is fine. That's what it is. The yaw, you can see the little quad at the top is yawing and doing everything. And if I want to have it rotate over that way and over that way, bring it back nice and flat. And if I want to roll the quad, I can roll the quad with these different settings. So we now know that everything is functioning as far as the quad is concerned. So we now have it set up to do the job of flying an airplane. Going back into our tabs, the thing that is important to me is using serial UART, because that's what I set it to be. S-bus, if you remember in the first opening screen, we went for S-bus, very important. Telemetry output, I have no idea what it does. Turn it on. I doubt it does anything. Now, AETR, that is the map of these switches. If you find when you press the throttle or something else and something else happens that you're not happy with, you just need to change this. A is aileron, E is elevator, T is throttle, and R is rotation. So that's what that means. There's nothing else down here that you need to be concerned about. And in fact, if you have a look while I'm pressing the throttle, you see the graph at the bottom is showing you that something's actually happening. So just giving you an idea of what's going on with the particular aircraft. Now, what's important as well is while we've got this in our hands, we need to go into the modes. From here, there's nothing we're going to change, so I'm not saving and rebooting at this point in time, but I'm going to go into modes. Modes are important. We need to add a range to ARM, so we're going to use, as per my written list, AUX 1, pick this up, stick it across that side. So when I flick the switch, it goes all the way. This is a two-stage switch, which will switch once there and once there. Now, it says hide unused modes, just unhide it so we can see. Now, I have my quad set up that it is on angle on one of the switches. And the reason for that one is I use number 4 and I set it up in the middle, which means that when I flick switch into the aux 4 into the first position, and aux 4 is there it is there. I'm moving a switch and you can see the button going across. That gives me that position. If I then go down and I want GPS rescue, I'm going to use the same switch, which is aux 4, except I'm now moving that to the end. So that same switch, which is off on aux 4, gives me angle, which is nice flat flying mode. And there is a reason for using angle. If you get stuck in a mountain somewhere, you've lost the quad for a second, flick it into angle, and then put full throttle on. What will happen is the quad will level up and fly straight up into the air, more than likely give you back your video signal straight away, and then you can relax and fly the thing home. That doesn't work. Go to the next switch, which is GPS rescue, and as you can see, the little yellow button has moved to the bottom, so we now have that one functioning perfectly well. So that gives us GPS. I don't use the failsafe thing. I use GPS. Going further down, I like my beeper to be on as well, and I'm going to have the beeper on aux 3. And again, you can have it in the middle, and the beeper is that switch. There it is there. And the next one I want, which is flip after crash, flip over after crash, and I'm going to use the same aux, which is 3. And I'm going to have it in the first position and move that to the end. So the same one that I used for the beeper, I can use for the flip after crash and aux 3. Looking at the rest of these here, there's a whole stack of them. Ready, beeper, mute, stick commands, launch control, that's if you're a racer. Paralyze, I have no idea what all that is. Pit mode, I presume, just reduces the power level of your VTX. I then hide all the unused modes and click save. We've now got all the modes are saved. Let's check it again, make sure click. Yep, go back to the receiver. Now if you have a look on the receiver, and we now move the arm switches, you can see the switches moving. If I move the GPS rescue switches, and you can hear the quad beeping, and if I want flip after crash, that's the other one. So now we know that all of our modes are functioning perfectly well. That pretty much takes care of this screen. We've had adjustments, there's nothing to do here. Servos, you're not using servos. GPS, the GPS is showing up here in my case because I do have a GPS on this particular quad. The reason it's just flashing and carrying on is because there are no GPS signals being received in the house. Now the next one we've got to do is the motors. And this is the important one. Now, props off, guaranteed. It even says here, don't do this unless you take the props off. If you're stupid enough to try it with the props on, chances are you will cut something, either your fingers or wires or something. Take the props off. In my case, I run my props reverse. Normally, they run this way. The reason I don't like this is because if it hits any rocks and it splits them up against the lens of the cameras. So by changing that to go reverse direction, we're all good. D-Shot 600 is what this flight controller uses. I'm not worried about any of these things here. What we're going to do now is we're going to test this. So we put that switch across, and it says configuration changes have been detected. Okay, it's fine. Let's save and reboot it. Back to the motors. Now, we want to check motor direction. And so it says here, safety notice, remove all propellers. Once again, telling you be smart. I understand the risks. Here we go. Now you can do this individually, which is what I have to do. And you put it on here and you make sure that motor 1 is running. And in my case, it's currently number 3. So it's not correct. Motor 2, it's telling me motor 4 is motor 2, which is also not correct. Motor 3 is now motor 1. 2 is not correct. And motor 4. They're all going in the right direction. Now, if they weren't, you can click it to normal or reverse. Don't worry about this at this point in time. Going back to close, we're now going to reorder the motors. Once again, it's going to ask us, and props off and everything else. Start this one. Really straightforward. Ask you which motor is running. Click on the spinning motor, that one. Click on the motor that's spinning, that one. And click on that motor. And then save it. The reason you have to save it is it goes to the ESC and it recalibrates your ESCs. Back to the motors. I'm going to check it again because I never trust any of these things myself. This time, all I need to do is flick this little switch over here, and I can then take motor 1 and slowly raise it up, and motor 1 is running and it's going in the correct direction. Motor 2, it's running in the correct direction. Motor 4, it's running in the correct. Now you can do all 4 together. Doing that, no requirement. I'm all good. I'm all happy with everything. We can switch that switch off. OSD, this is the one that is, for me, under this current profile, a bit of a nuisance because it shows you this beautiful big screen and it shows you the low voltage thing hanging out the end here with HD over here. Now, you cannot change it. It will keep flicking back. I'll flick it to PAL. It's decided it's OH high definition, which it is. Here's my advice. My advice is your screen is about this big. Work in this area, but use your goggles so that you can actually see what's going on. So what I like is I want to know what the altitude of my aircraft is running at. I'm going to put it right up there and about that point. Like I said, that's about the smallest screen I've got. Now, the next ones I want, you can add anything you want here. I'm just going to put a bunch of them on the screen and check them. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I've got my screen set up, and I'm now going to move them around using the goggles, because otherwise you can't really see where they are. So I'm looking at it, and I'm finding that that one needs to be shifted across a little bit into the middle. This arrow goes underneath it. It shows me where it is. The kilometers per hour can go quite far across, as can the 2 GPS signals. This one, unfortunately, is doing what it's supposed to be doing, actually, which is putting them in the right spot. My last drone, it didn't do that. It was all over the damn show. It made it really difficult. Altitude can come down there. All right, so what we've got on our screen is we've got the 14 satellites with the home arrow underneath it, which will come up once we fly it. All right, so we can save that, because that gives us a proper set of screens. There's heaps and heaps of things you can have here. There's no point worrying about all the warnings and all that, because quite some of them will work when you're in flight, but ultimately watch these are the only ones you need to know. How many milliamps have you used? What's your battery voltage? And the darn thing when it runs out of power. That's really the only ones you need to worry about. RC channels and all these other things, you can do that yourself. That's not an issue. Right, let's go back. First of all, we're going to save this so that it is all saved and we're ready to go. Now, last thing I want to have a quick look at is you've got Blackbox on here. Forget sensors, forget video transmitter. You can go there and fiddle with this if you want to. You can do sensors if you want to, tethered, all this stuff. Not important on a quad. Under Blackbox, what I have here is I'm going to select, which is the gyros, and the reason being is it gives you an idea of what's happening. Gyro raw information. Erase the flash that I've got. Yes, get rid of the flash because it was flown with the flash. The other thing that I'm doing is over here, 1/4 kilohertz. If you have a very high reading in there, you'll get a lot more information, but you'll only get a little bit of information because it will take up the 16 gigs on your onboard flash really quickly. So you will not necessarily be able to see more than if you had it running slightly slower. I would love to be able to go down to 1 hertz, which is once per second, or maybe even 2 hertz, but kilohertz is thousands per second. So it's reading a heck of a lot of data. As you can see, it's now freed up 16 gigabytes, and the quad is now all set up. Everything is good, ready to go. We can now disconnect it because we can go and test it and fly this particular. So disconnect, and guys, that's it for Beta 4.4 release candidate 1 and how to set up the various things that you may want to do with your quad. I find a lot of guys doing this tend to go super fast and assume that everybody knows what's going on, and we don't. And so it's great to be able to just show you wherever I've had issues and hopefully stops you having problems. Thanks for watching. If you like this, hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Help an old bloke out. Thank you.